So we were talking today about elections. Last week we talked about the propositions and what was on the ballot, what our thoughts were on the ballot, and today we're kind of seeing some of the results of the California primaries as well as the whole country.
I mean, we talked mostly about the propositions last week, and I think let's kind of review what the propositions were. First of all, the very first one, Proposition 1, was reproductive rights.
Yeah.
And it was to basically amend the Constitution, right?
Yeah, to include a right to an abortion, like to say that's a part of a fundamental right in California. And that passed.
It passed pretty strongly. 66% of Californians, or at least the people that voted, were in favor of that. But I thought it was interesting, all the gambling propositions failed.
Yeah.
Every single one of them.
26 and 27 were both gambling, and one used Indian casinos or Native American casinos, one didn't. There's a few different nuances we talked about last week.
The different sources of gambling were kind of fighting each other. So the Indian tribes, the gaming was fighting against the card. It's just kind of interesting. It's like, really?
Yeah, but it's I mean, the reason being California is a big market, and to say they want sports betting, it's just how are they going to get it in here? And it was fun. We talked about last week. They were funded by these DraftKings and these giant companies with lots of money trying to get access to our market.
Right.
But California said no to both of them, and so sports betting continues to not be legal in California. I think 28 is interesting. This was increasing the funding for arts programs, and I think it used to be more for schools. And then they decided to split that, and they saw the STEM items. We need more money for STEM, where they've done that. Now they're saying, well, now we need more money for art. I think it's a clever, the splitting it up to say we need art, STEM, and not that they're opposite. And I don't think they are, but they're being treated as if this piecemeal increase.
Yeah, and we talked about the propositions and the wording of them, and underline, you kind of cut through the top and try to get into the core of the propositions. What are they really after?
Right.
And sometimes it's different than what you think you're voting for. Right.
Yeah, our California system. I'm sure there's other systems that are worse, but it's interesting. It's really hard, I think, to get to the meat of what's going to happen, what that will affect and mean for people. Reminds me of Brexit in England, where people voted to leave the European Union and then said, "Wait, what? No, wait, we don't." And then they had a huge debate raging for the next 2 years of, did we mean to vote that? Was that really what we understood?
Yeah, the economic impact of it, and what was the logistics, particularly in the trading. How things were going to be traded cross border, and it becomes really complex.
It does. That's right. So then dialysis. I think we said this is the third or fourth time this dialysis.
Yeah, this has come up. And of course, this is a vote against the union, because you got the SEIU, which is trying to unionize all the people in these dialysis, and they're trying to require union paid activity, people there. And the state of California pretty much resoundingly defeated it again. I mean, it was almost 70% said, no, we're not going to do this.
So no to that one. And then Proposition 30, that was the basically tax on people making more than $1 million.
Right.
The idea that would fund electric vehicle infrastructure or rebates or things of that nature.
This is the Lyft sponsored one.
Lyft,
I guess they put a lot of money into it.
And that was part of, one of the ads I saw about it was saying this wasn't really about electric vehicles. This was about Lyft and some of these companies trying to get away from having to pay for their electric fleets in the future in California, trying to say, if California will pay for the fleet for us, then we'll be able to upgrade to electric. And whether that's true or not, I'm not sure, but it was defeated. And so the tax doesn't exist. And we talked about last week, someone who makes $1 million every year, maybe they can pay more or not. And that's kind of a political thought. But a lot of the people I think would get caught in this is, they sell a business and they have 1 year where maybe they make $2 million, but that's the $2 million for the rest of their life. They're a relatively small business owner who has a great business, they're ready to sell and exit. They're going to get hammered on this. And I think not having that in California is useful.
And California already has an excise tax on somebody who makes $1 million or more in a given year.
Yep.
So if your income leading up and your income above that, they have an additional state income tax, so to speak.
Yep.
So this would just add on top of that what they already have.
There's already a Medicare tax as well. And there's a number of taxes that most everybody doesn't deal with until you get into these higher levels. And there's, like I said, there's some people who make that year over year, but a lot of folks I think would have been falling into this. So when they sell a business and they get a couple $1 million, which is their life savings, and all of a sudden they realize they have these really large unexpected tax bills.
Right.
And then the last one was Proposition 31. That was the ban on flavored tobacco. I was fairly surprised that this passed. I think
the yes means it was no. The yes,
right.
The yes, if you voted yes for this, that means you were against flavored tobacco.
Yeah. So in California, flavored tobacco, my understanding is that flavored tobacco will not be able to be sold.
Right.
And the idea being that it would help prevent youth from being hooked on this stuff, from trying
Right.
it out, from
It's an enticement. I mean, the logic is that you give these weird flavors to this stuff, and it's an enticement to younger people start smoking.
Yeah, that was the argument. Yeah. So people who, I guess, more on the libertarian side, who say, "Hey, I want to do whatever I want.
Right.
I live in California. I want to have orange flavored tobacco." You're not going to be able to get it here in California.
Right. You'll have to go to Las Vegas and buy it or something. I don't know.
Go across the border. So those are the propositions. Those kind of came through. It was an interesting, even today, we're recording earlier in the week, but looking at the 14, we'll just start with the U.S. House. Go a little bit broad for a second. There's still 14 seats that are pending.
Yeah.
And if at this moment, if the Republican Party wins one of them, they'll have the majority in the House. So it looks fairly likely
they'll have it.
Yeah. But even locally, Ken Calvert won.
That was a close race, much closer than what we thought. But then we went back to gerrymandering. Most voters don't realize that census that they do every 10 years, that ends up doing a reproportion of the districts or the voting block.
Right.
And there was a different voting block that voted for Ken Calvert than had done in the previous 20 years, actually.
Yeah.
And it almost, from what we understand right now, he's got it, but it was a close race.
Yeah, it was very close. And he's Southern California, and then also Michelle Steele. Hers was also very close, but both of them Republicans, both of them held on to their seats. The other ones that are still pending, I think David Valadio and Mike Garcia and Kevin
Mike Garcia
Kiley.
seems like he's got the advantage, but they haven't called it yet.
Yeah, I think all three of those are leading at the moment. And if any of those win here, those are the California ones that were close at the moment still. If any of them win here in California, they'll tip the House. There's a few others across the country, but we'll kind of just stay California focused. So, I mean, a day in which I think, excuse me, that in California, the Republican House representatives, I feel like they did fairly well, either holding on to seats or gaining seats.
And you got to also remember that Kevin McCarthy is most likely, he's the top candidate right now to be the Speaker of the House if the Republicans take the majority, which is going to be a feather for California to some degree. He's going to have some political power as well as appropriations power, right?
Yeah. So could look good for California. So let's see. So we talked about propositions, the U.S. Senate or the U.S. House. The Senate, last I read, it's still 50 members are Democrat, 49 Republican. I think it's going to stay that way. They'll keep control of the Senate.
Right. And there's going to be a runoff in Georgia that we're not going to know what the results of that is until December sometime.
Yeah, that'll be a while.
I think what's interesting to me is what was predicted as the red wave. Most of the pollsters said, this is a midterm election. The economy is really bad. Inflation is bad. There's a lot of negatives. So typically the party that's in power gets punished dramatically. So they thought, most of the pollsters that came out and predicted, they said there's going to be a red wave. There's going to be a change not only in the House, but also the Senate. There's going to be a clear majority. And candidly, that just didn't happen.
Yeah,
that didn't happen.
Yeah, I think there's advances. There was one talking head, I think, made a comment that we're still a country divided. Despite all those items to say we need, was the normal sentiment, throw the bums out. Everyone says that every time. Let's try again, try something new. That we didn't see the same as a red wave. It was still a divided position. But whether that's good or bad, I'm not sure.
And I think the voting populace, again, when you get down past all of the media, past all the newspapers and the television and everything else, what does Mr. and Mrs. America really believe is best for them?
Yeah.
And for those people that are really serious about voting, they're going to take a good hard look. And I think the propositions kind of indicated that those states that tried to ban abortion because of the decision by the Supreme Court on Roe v. Wade, those states actually got punished because the more conservative element tried to get that in the Constitution. And in California, there was almost the exact opposite.
Yep.
So no, we're going to put it in so you have reproductive rights guaranteed by the Constitution of California. So kind of an interesting flip on some of this stuff.
No, it really is. Let's just talk about Senate. We can talk about the mayors for a moment, the mayor race. The local one we have around here is Rick Caruso and Bass, kind of that structure. It looks like Ms. Bass.
Los Angeles race.
Yeah, Los Angeles. Yeah, thank you. It looks like Ms. Bass is the winning at the moment. We'll see. Last count I heard, Caruso would have to take around 4% of everything that was left. Beat her by 4% for everything that's left, and who knows if that's reasonable.
Yeah, I think there's a possibility. So they haven't called the race. Nobody's seceded to the race. But we'll wait and see over the next. Hopefully by this weekend, we'll have some kind of results from this. The thing that that I think is really interesting as we dug deep into this and kind of looked at it is that the deniers that said back in 2020 that the elections were rigged, that they were defrauded, that the people that really should have won didn't win. And it's kind of interesting going forward, and that those deniers, they carried that forward, prompted primarily by Trump, saying that if you were a candidate under his umbrella, you had to believe that the election was rigged in some way. And every single one of those candidates, now this is what the play was kind of interesting, is that the Democratic Party, what they did is they targeted the Trump candidates in the primary and gave them money. What they wanted to do is to get those candidates into the general election. And every single one of the candidates that the Democratic Party targeted, which were Trump supporters, every single one of them lost. I think strategically that was an amazing calculation on their part.
So the Democratic Party basically promoting some of these Republican Trump supporting candidates to get them through the primaries, get them into the election, and then funding the Democratic challenger to defeat them in essence.
Yeah, and I think they had the pulse of the voters. And the voters said, okay, if this is an extreme candidate that gets to the general election, and what we saw in several of these states is that people would vote for a candidate that was Republican but was not Trump or denier backed, so to speak, versus one that is, and they would split their vote. They would vote for one, but they wouldn't vote for the other. So I think, again, hopefully these lessons are taken forward. But I just think, politics, there's just a lot of strategies that are used for this.
Well, and there's some human nature in that, because I think there's, whether or not the election needs to be tuned up, whether or not there was issues, that's one, finite question.
Right.
But I think there's also the sentiment of, whenever the Super Bowl comes about, it was stolen from us. The ref made the call, or the ball was a deflate gate, the ball was, there's a natural tendency when your side doesn't win then to say, hey, you cheated. And that doesn't explain all of this necessarily, but I do think that's a natural one to play off of. And then to say, at what point does someone have to accept that they lost the Super Bowl? At what point do they have to accept that they're moving on? Not to say we can't, improve our systems, and that's a fantastic thing that we have safe, secure, trustworthy voting. I think everyone at least should be able to, but agree that should be what we move to, and that we have, and everyone has confidence in that. But the sentiment to say, hey, I don't like that. That wasn't what it should have been.
Yeah, the system allows to not necessarily be rigged, but it allows to be pushed one way or the other. And so the deniers, because they were so vocal and so opinionated and so isolated, so to speak, a certain percentage of people just didn't believe that the 2020 election was fair. But instead of taking the loss, like for going back to your example of the Super Bowl, at the end of the day, whoever the call was made against, they lost. And it was, you may protest and scream and yell about it, but you have to ultimately accept the losers and the winner, I guess what I'm saying. But I think going forward from 2020, a lot of people just felt like this was wrong, and it should be, I don't know, they should take their mandate and have somebody should be punished for this some way. And I think that generally across the board, the people said, no, the election was fair, and by and large, this is the way it was.
It sounds like what you're saying is almost a referendum on that sentiment to say, do we deny the 2020 election, or do we say, we have to move on from this? And
there's a couple of governors. I mean, I can think of DeSantis in Florida, as well as Kemp in Georgia. They stepped away from that. They didn't want to be part of that theme, and they won. They won with pretty big majorities. And so you have to look at that and say, okay, the voters really do want people that are, they do what they believe. They're not focused on this one thing. They look at the overall governance that they are elected to do, right?
No, that's great. And it will be interesting taking all these data points, into the 2024 election,
right?
Of what this means or doesn't mean. I think there's so much articles that came out and are still coming out, what this means, and I think I was trying to get to that. Well, if you've missed any part of this episode, feel free to go on our website. It's retirementunlimited.com. You can find past episodes. You can use the contact button and send us, if you have a topic you'd like to discuss, you can send it to us through that. And also call our office. It's 951-684-7011.